Aliens captured Earth's secret Dreadnought. Then humanity closed every escape route. Far past Neptune, where the sun was just a bright star and no cameras from any other world were pointed, there was a shipyard that did not exist on any public map. It was called Foundry 12. Only a few thousand people in the entire Sol Federation knew it was there, and most of them had never seen it with their own eyes. It floated in the dark, wrapped in stealth fields, cooled to match the background temperature of space so that no heat signature would give it away. From the outside, it looked like nothing. From the inside, it was the most important place humanity had ever built. Inside Foundry 12, for 11 years, human engineers had been building a ship. Not a normal warship, something bigger. Something meant to answer a question that had been quietly worrying the leaders of Earth ever since the first alien contact 40 years earlier. What happens when a truly hostile power finally finds us? They called the ship the Hammerfall. It was 3 kilometers long, built from alloys that had taken a decade to invent, carrying weapons that no alien scan had ever recorded because they had never been fired, not even once. Not even in a test that could be picked up by a passing probe. The Hammerfall was not meant to fight small wars. It was built to fight the worst possible day, the day when someone found Earth and decided humanity did not deserve to keep it. Admiral Elena Voss had commanded Foundry 12 for the last 6 years. She was 52 years old, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm voice that made panicking engineers stop panicking. She had watched the Hammerfall grow from a skeleton of beams to a finished hull to, finally, a ship that was almost ready to fly. Almost. That was the problem. The ship was 94% complete. Its main crew of 4,000 had not yet been assigned. Only a skeleton team of 600 engineers and testers lived aboard, running system checks, walking through empty corridors that would one day hold soldiers who did not exist yet. It was in this state, unfinished and thinly staffed, that the Vex Concord found it. The Vex were not new to human intelligence. Earth had known about them for 8 years, ever since a listening post near the edge of the system had picked up faint communications in a language no human computer could translate at first. Slowly, painfully, contact had been pieced together. The Vex were an old empire, older than human civilization itself, and they had a simple rule that governed how they treated younger species. If a species could not defend what it had, it did not deserve to keep it. They did not conquer for cruelty. They conquered because, in their view, weakness was an invitation. For 8 years, the Vex had watched humanity from a distance, sending small scout ships that stayed just outside detection range, learning what they could, deciding whether Earth was worth the trouble of a full invasion. Human command knew about most of these scouts. Not all of them. One Vex scout, a fast reconnaissance vessel called a Needle-class ship by human analysts, had been drifting through the outer system for 3 months, running silent, mapping every human installation it could find. It found Foundry 12 by accident. A resupply shuttle heading to the shipyard left a heat trail for 11 seconds longer than protocol allowed, and the Needle's sensors caught it. What the Needle's captain saw when it crept closer changed everything. A warship 3 kilometers long, larger than anything the Vex had ever detected from a species this young. The captain did not attack. She did not even get closer. She turned her ship around and ran for the nearest relay point to send the news back to the nearest Vex battle fleet, 4 jumps away, in a system called Aldrin's Reach. The message she sent was short. Humans have built something we did not know they could build. Recommend immediate seizure before it becomes operational. The Vex fleet commander who received that message was named Kesh Drow, a war leader with 300 years of service and a reputation for moving fast before an enemy could prepare. He did not hesitate. Within 6 hours, he had assembled a raiding force of 12 warships, faster and better armed than anything humanity had ever fielded, and pointed them toward Foundry 12. Human sensors picked up the Vex fleet the moment it entered the outer system. Admiral Voss was in her command chair within 90 seconds of the alert. "Confirm contact," she said. "Confirmed, Admiral," said her sensor officer, a young lieutenant named Priya Anand, her voice tight but steady. 12 Vex warships, entering at high speed, bearing directly for Foundry 12. Time to arrival, 40 minutes. Voss looked at the tactical display. 40 minutes. Not enough time to finish crewing the Hammerfall. Not enough time to move it anywhere safe. not enough time to do anything except decide what to do with what they had. This was the moment every plan at Foundry 12 had been built around, though almost none of the 600 people aboard the Hammerfall knew it yet. There was a plan for exactly this. It had been written years earlier by strategists who had studied the Vex Concorde's patterns and understood something important about them. The Vex did not destroy valuable things. They captured them. A ship like the Hammerfall, unfinished but clearly powerful, would not be blown apart by a raiding fleet like Kestral's. It would be taken, towed away as a prize, a trophy, proof that the Vex had found something worth boasting about. That was the plan's entire foundation. Let them take it. Voss opened a channel to Fleet Command on Earth, 4 light minutes away, knowing her message would not arrive for those 4 minutes, and any answer would take 4 more. Command, this is Foundry 12. Vex raiding force inbound. 12 ships. 40 minutes to contact. The Hammerfall is not combat ready, requesting authorization to execute contingency anchor. She did not wait for a response. There was no time. Contingency anchor did not require Earth's permission to begin, only Earth's cooperation to finish, and she knew the machinery on the other end was already turning. She had trained for this. Everyone at Foundry 12 who mattered had trained for this, even if they had trained without knowing exactly when it would happen. She turned to her staff. All non-essential personnel to the escape pods. Essential systems crew, stay at your posts. We are not fighting this fleet, we are feeding it. A young engineer named Marcus Webb, barely 26 years old, one of the few people aboard who actually understood the Hammerfall's deepest systems, looked up from his console with wide eyes. Feeding it, Admiral. The ship isn't finished, Lieutenant, but its bones are. Its weapons are locked out. Its drive is capped. To a Vex boarding party, it will look exactly like what it is. A very large, very expensive, very helpless target. That is exactly what we want them to think. Marcus swallowed. And if they just destroy it instead of boarding it? They won't, Voss said. The Vex have never destroyed a ship this valuable. In 40 years of contact with other species. They collect. They display. They want trophies to prove their strength to their own people. We built the Hammerfall to look exactly like the kind of trophy they cannot resist. Over the next 30 minutes, the crew of Foundry 12 did something that felt, to almost everyone involved, like madness. They did not power up weapons, they did not try to flee. Non-essential crew evacuated quietly toward hidden escape routes that led to stealth pods, tiny vessels built to look like debris, scattering away from the shipyard in directions that would take them far from the coming battle. The remaining crew, fewer than 200 souls now, prepared the Hammerfall not for war, but for capture. Deep inside the ship, in sealed compartments that did not appear on any external schematic, other things were happening. Compartments were locking themselves from the inside. Systems were rerouting. A second, hidden crew, smaller, quieter, chosen specifically for this mission, moved through corridors that officially did not exist, taking up positions that had been rehearsed 100 times in simulation, and never once in reality. When the Vex fleet arrived, it found exactly what its scout had promised, an enormous, unfinished warship, guarded by only a handful of small support vessels that fled the moment the Vex ships appeared, exactly as they were supposed to. Kestrel watched the tactical display aboard his flagship with something close to satisfaction. No resistance, he said to his second-in-command, a broad-shouldered officer named Urel. The humans are as unprepared as our scout reported. Should we destroy the support craft, Commander? Let them run, Dral said. They are nothing. That, he gestured at the massive shape on the display, is everything. Board it. Take it intact. I want it towed back to Aldrin's Reach before the humans can organize a rescue fleet they do not have the ships to send. The boarding was almost too easy. Vex assault craft, small and fast, latched onto the Hammerfall's hull at a dozen points. Cutting teams burned through airlocks that had been left conveniently unreinforced. Vex soldiers, tall and armored in dark plating, moved through the outer corridors of the ship meeting almost no resistance, capturing the handful of human crew who remained in view, disabling the weak defenses that had been left active on purpose. Within 2 hours, Kestrel stood on the bridge of the Hammerfall himself, looking out through its main viewport at the stars, at Foundry 12 burning quietly behind him from a handful of controlled demolitions that made it look, to Vex sensors, like a shipyard destroying its own secrets, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. It was, in truth, another piece of the plan. Nothing at Foundry 12 that mattered was actually being destroyed. The truly valuable equipment had already been moved out through the same hidden routes the evacuating crew had used. A great victory, Dral said, running a clawed hand along the arm of the captain's chair. A chair built for a human body, uncomfortable for his own. The humans built something extraordinary, and we have taken it without losing a single ship. Uriel approached, his voice lower than usual. Commander, sensor teams report something strange. Large sections of this ship will not respond to our control systems. Entire decks show no response at all, as if they are sealed from something deeper inside. Dral did not turn from the viewport. New technology, Uriel. Human technology we do not yet understand. That is exactly why this ship is worth taking. We will study it at our leisure once we are home in Vex space, behind our own defenses, far from any human fleet that might come looking. He gave the order. The Hammerfall, silent and captured, was locked into a tow formation between two of the largest Vex warships. The raiding fleet turned and began its long journey back toward the border, back toward the staging system called Aldrin's Reach, carrying with it the greatest prize any Vex commander had taken from a young species in over a century. What Dral did not know, what none of his officers suspected, was that 4 light minutes away, on Earth, a message had already been received and answered. Fleet Command had approved contingency anchor in full. Every gate technician in the Sol Federation's border defense network had already begun receiving new orders. Ships that had been sitting quietly in reserve fleets for years, ships the Vex had never detected because they had never once been used, were beginning to move. Aldrin's Reach had 6 jump gates connecting it to the rest of known space. The Vex fleet was heading toward the 7th one, the one that led back to human territory, confident that no human force could possibly follow them through it in time to matter. They were about to learn that humanity had never intended to chase them at all. Admiral Voss, safely aboard an escape shuttle drifting in the debris field that had once been Foundry 12, watched the Vex fleet's icon shrink on her display as it pulled away with the Hammerfall in tow. Marcus Webb sat beside her, still pale, still shaken by how calmly everyone around him had let their greatest ship be taken. They really think they won, he said quietly. They did win, Voss said. This part of it at least. We let them win it. She looked at the display a moment longer, at the 6 jump gates marked in the system called Aldrin's Reach, each one now flashing with a new status code that only a handful of people in the Federation were cleared to understand. Now we close the door behind them. Marcus frowned. All 6 gates? All 6, Voss said. Every single one. The Vex just towed our best ship into a system with only one way out that we intend to leave open, and it is not the way they think. Far ahead of them, unaware, Dral's fleet carried the Hammerfall deeper into the trap that had been built for it 11 years before the Vex ever found Foundry 12 at all. To understand why humanity was ready for this moment, it helps to go back further, to the year the Hammerfall project began. First contact with an alien species had happened 40 years before Dral ever laid eyes on the human Dreadnought, and it had not gone the way most people on Earth expected. There had been no grand fleet arriving in orbit, no dramatic first words exchanged between species. Instead, a small, automated probe belonging to a minor trading species called the Orin had drifted into the outer solar system, malfunctioned, and been recovered by a human salvage crew who had no idea what they had found, until Earth's best scientists spent 2 years taking it apart. What those scientists learned from that single broken probe changed everything about how humanity saw its place in the universe. The galaxy was old, far older than anyone had guessed, and it was full of life. Dozens of species, some peaceful traders like the Orin, some cautious and withdrawn, and some, like the Vex Concord, openly predatory toward anyone weaker than themselves. Earth's leaders had spent that first year in near panic, until a young strategist named Daniel Farrow, barely 30 years old at the time, presented a plan to the United Nations Security Council that would eventually become the foundation for everything that followed. Farrow's argument was simple. Humanity could not, in a single generation, hope to match the technology of species that had been exploring the stars for thousands of years. Trying to build ships that could outgun a hostile empire in open battle was a losing strategy, a race Earth could never win by brute force alone. Instead, Farrow proposed something different. Humanity should build a small number of extraordinary weapons, hidden completely from outside observation, and pair them with patience, discipline, and a willingness to let an enemy believe it had already won, before revealing the truth. It took years to convince the world's governments to fund a project like Foundry 12, years of careful argument and quiet demonstration, but eventually the plan was approved, and the shipyard past Neptune was built in near total secrecy. Over the following decade, 3 such secret projects were started. 2 failed, victims of cost overruns and engineering problems that proved too difficult to solve. Only the Hammerfall survived, becoming the single greatest secret in human history, known to fewer people than could fill a small theater. Admiral Voss had been part of the project since its 2nd year, recruited directly by Pharaoh himself, back when the ship existed only as blueprints and a stubborn belief that humanity's best chance at survival was not strength alone, but the wisdom to hide that strength until the moment it truly mattered. She had watched Pharaoh grow old over the years that followed, watched him retire from active command, but never stop consulting on the project he had created, and she carried his philosophy with her into every decision she made, including the one she had just made watching the hammer fall, towed away by an enemy fleet that believed it had won everything. Aboard her escape shuttle, drifting quietly in the wreckage field that had once been Foundry 12, Voss allowed herself a rare moment to think about Pharaoh now, wondering what he would say if he could see this moment, the plan he had first sketched out on a whiteboard 4 decades earlier, finally being tested in the real world for the first time. "Admiral," Marcus Webb said quietly beside her, still watching the shrinking icon of the Vex fleet on the display. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "Did you ever think it would actually work?" "Not in simulation. For real." Voss considered the question honestly before answering. "I hoped it would. Hope and certainty aren't the same thing, Marcus. We built this plan around assumptions about how the Vex think, how they behave, what they value. Assumptions can be wrong, but we also built in enough redundancy that even if some of those assumptions failed, we would still have options. That's the part I was certain about. Not that everything would go perfectly, but that we would never be left with nothing." Marcus nodded slowly, looking back at the display, at the 6 gates of Aldrin's Reach glowing softly at the edge of the system, each one carrying a story he did not yet know, of quiet operatives who had spent years building lives as traders and mechanics near a system nobody outside the Vex Concord had ever cared about, waiting patiently for a message that told them the day had finally come. "What happens to the crew still aboard?" he asked. Commander Park's people, 211 of them, hiding on a ship surrounded by enemy soldiers. "They knew the risk when they volunteered," Voss said, her voice softer now. "Every one of them chose this. Park hand-picked that crew himself, over almost a year of interviews and training exercises, looking for people who could stay calm under exactly this kind of pressure. I won't pretend it isn't dangerous, Marcus. It is, but they are not defenseless, and they are not alone. The moment this operation was approved, every one of them became the most important people in this entire plan, and Earth does not intend to let them down." The shuttle drifted on through the dark, part of a scattered group of similar vessels making their slow, careful way toward a rendezvous point, where a hardened command ship waited to gather them up and bring them back into the fight, even if that fight, for now, was still mostly a waiting game. Behind them, the ruins of Foundry 12 tumbled silently through space, debris that had once been humanity's greatest secret, now serving one final purpose, convincing the only Vex scout that might still be watching that Earth's shipbuilding capacity had been dealt a crushing blow, when in truth, every piece of equipment that mattered had already been moved to a second, even more secret facility months earlier, waiting to build the next ship, and the one after that, if it ever came to it. Far ahead, the Vex fleet carried its prize deeper into the dark, 4 jumps and 2 days from Aldrin's Reach, entirely unaware that the true battle for the Hammerfall had not yet even begun. Aldrin's Reach was not a place anyone would choose to live. It was a dim system with a small orange star, 2 rocky planets with no air worth breathing, and a scattering of asteroid fields that had made it useless for farming, and only barely useful for mining. What made it valuable to the Vex Concord was its position. It sat at a crossroads of 6 jump gates, ancient structures built by a long-dead species that neither humans nor Vex fully understood, gates that let ships cross distances in hours that would otherwise take years. For the Vex, Aldrin's Reach was a staging ground, a place where fleets gathered before pushing further into unclaimed space, including the space near a small yellow star called the Sun. Kesh Dral's fleet reached Aldrin's Reach 2 days after leaving the wreckage of Foundry 12 behind. The journey back had been slow, careful. The Hammerfall towed gently between two Vex warships like a prize animal on a leash, its systems dark, its corridors quiet except for the boots of Vex soldiers walking through them, cataloging everything they found. Dral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Ashvane, watching the tactical display as more and more ships arrived to see the captured human Dreadnought with their own eyes. Word had spread fast, faster than Dral had expected. Other Vex commanders, curious and a little jealous, had begun redirecting their own patrols toward Aldrin's Reach just to see the thing everyone was talking about. "They are calling it the greatest capture in a century," Yrel said, standing at Dral's side, watching the same numbers rise. "3 fleets have already requested permission to dock nearby and send boarding teams of their own, just to study it. Let them look," Dral said. "Let them see what real strength looks like. This is what happens to a species that builds something beyond its ability to defend." There was pride in his voice, the kind of pride that came easily to a commander who had just won the largest victory of his career without losing a single soldier. He had reason to be proud. In 40 years of contact with the human species, no Vex commander had ever captured something of this size intact. Most human ships that fell into Vex hands were small, damaged, barely worth studying. The Hammerfall was different, even half-finished, even with entire sections locked and unresponsive. It was clearly the most advanced thing humanity had ever built, and it was now sitting in the middle of a Vex staging fleet, with over 40 warships around it. Aboard the Hammerfall itself, the boarding parties were slowly discovering just how strange their prize really was. A Vex engineering officer named Sethis, small for a Vex but sharp-minded, had been assigned to lead the technical survey of the captured ship. She had spent 2 full days walking its corridors with a team of specialists, mapping systems, testing access points, trying to understand a design philosophy built by a species her people had never taken seriously enough to study closely. What she found unsettled her, though she was careful not to say so too loudly. "Commander," she reported to Dral on the 3rd day, standing at attention in the Hammerfall's captured bridge, "we have mapped approximately 60% of the ship's structure. The remaining 40% does not respond to any override we have tried. Entire decks are sealed behind doors that do not register on our systems as doors at all. Our scanners read them as solid hull." "A trick of human engineering," Dral said, not overly concerned. "Hidden compartments. We will cut through them eventually." "That is not the strangest part, Commander." Sethis hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Life sign detectors show no activity in the sealed sections. No power draw beyond baseline systems. And yet, 3 times now, our teams have reported hearing movement in corridors adjacent to sealed areas. Footsteps, machinery, sounds that stop the moment anyone investigates." Dral's amusement faded slightly. "You believe there are humans still hiding aboard this ship?" "I believe," Sethis said, "that we do not yet understand what this ship is capable of hiding. I recommend caution before we attempt to move it further into Vex territory." Dral considered this for a long moment. He had not risen to command a raiding fleet by being reckless, but he also had not risen by being timid. A ship this size, sitting exposed in a border system, was a target for every ambitious rival commander who wanted to steal his glory. The longer the Hammerfall sat in Aldrin's Reach, the more Vex ships gathered to look at it, and the more eyes were on Dral's next decision. "We move it in 5 days, he said finally. "That gives your teams time to finish the survey and disable anything dangerous. In 5 days, we take it through the gate toward Vex Prime, where our best engineers can study it properly, far from any human fleet foolish enough to try to follow." Sethis bowed and left to relay the order, though something in her posture suggested she was not entirely satisfied with the timeline. She had spent enough years studying young species to know that the ones who built impressive things quietly, without boasting, without provoking a fight until they were ready for one, were the ones worth worrying about most. Humanity, from everything she had read in the Concord's files, fit that pattern uncomfortably well. 4 light minutes away and then some, on Earth, Fleet Command was moving with a speed and quiet discipline that would have surprised Kesh Dral if he had known about it. Admiral Voss, now aboard a hardened command vessel that had rendezvoused with her escape shuttle 2 days after the fall of Foundry 12, sat in a briefing room with a dozen senior officers and the Federation's Secretary of Defense, a stern-faced woman named Amara Okoye, joining by secure link from Earth. "Confirm the current status of contingency anchor," Okoye said. Voss brought up the display. A map of Aldrin's Reach glowed in front of them, 6 jump gates marked around its edges, each one now labeled with a status that had changed dramatically in the last 2 days. 4 of the 6 gates have already been quietly seized, Voss said. Small teams, deployed years ago under deep cover, posing as independent traders and salvage operators, have been slowly gaining access to the gate control stations at each location. As of 6 hours ago, we control the physical access points at 4 gates. The 5th gate is scheduled for the same by tomorrow. The 6th, she paused. The 6th gate is the one the Vex fleet came through, and it is the one we are leaving open for now. Why leave it open? Asked General Reyes, a broad man with a scar across his jaw who had spent 30 years in fleet operations. Because closing it too early tips our hand, Voss said. As long as that gate stays open and behaves normally, the Vex have no reason to suspect anything is wrong. They believe it is their easy way home. We want them to keep believing that until the moment we decide otherwise. Secretary Okoye nodded slowly. And the Hammerfall itself? What is its status? This was the part of the briefing everyone had been waiting for. Voss brought up a second display, a cutaway diagram of the captured Dreadnought, most of it grayed out to represent Vex-controlled sections, but a solid core running through the center of the ship still glowing blue. The Vex control roughly 60% of the ship's outer structure, Voss said. They do not control the core systems, the reactor, the weapons, or the secondary crew quarters, where 211 of our people are currently hiding in sealed sections built specifically for this scenario. Commander Elias Park is leading that hidden crew. He reports minimal Vex intrusion so far, though boarding teams have been probing the sealed sections with increasing frequency. 211 people, Okoye repeated quietly, trapped on a ship surrounded by 40 enemy warships. Not trapped, Madam Secretary, Voss said. Waiting, there is a difference, and Commander Park's people know it. They trained for this exact situation for 3 years. They know the ship better than any Vex engineer ever will, because they built it. Okoye studied the display a long moment. What happens when the Vex fleet moves the Hammerfall through that 6th gate? That is the question that decides everything, Voss said. Our intelligence suggests they plan to move it within the week, deeper into Vex territory, away from any chance of us recovering it by force. If that happens, we lose the ship, and likely lose the 211 people aboard it as well, once the Vex finish breaking through the sealed sections. So we cannot let that happen. No, Voss said, which means the 6th gate does not stay open forever. It stays open exactly long enough to convince Kestrel his fleet is safe, and closes the moment he commits to moving deeper into the system, rather than turning around. General Reyes leaned forward. And once all 6 gates are sealed, what then? We have a Vex fleet of 40 warships trapped in a system, with our people still aboard the very ship they captured. That fleet outnumbers anything we can send through in time. Voss allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first anyone in the room had seen from her in days. General, we did not build contingency anchor around outnumbering the Vex fleet in open battle. We built it around never having to. Aldrin's Reach has 6 gates and nothing else worth defending. Once those gates are sealed, that fleet has nowhere to run, no supply line, and no idea that the ship they are sitting on top of was never truly captured at all. From here forward, every day that passes works against them, and for us. Secretary Okoye was quiet for a moment, studying the map, the 6 gates, the grayed-out sections of the Hammerfall, the blue core still burning steady at its center like a heart that refused to stop. Close the 5th gate on schedule, she said finally. Prepare the final phase for the 6th, and Admiral, she looked directly at Voss through the link, tell Commander Park and his people that Earth has not forgotten them, not for 1 second. I already have, Madam Secretary, Voss said. They knew that before they ever sealed those doors. Aboard the Hammerfall, deep inside a section of the ship that did not appear on any Vex schematic, Commander Elias Park sat in a small, dimly lit control room with a dozen of his officers around him, watching a live feed from hidden sensors scattered throughout the ship's outer hull. On the feed, Vex engineering teams moved through captured corridors, cutting into walls, testing systems, slowly, patiently trying to unlock secrets that had been built specifically to resist them. "They're getting closer to Deck 9, said Lieutenant Sarah Chen, watching a sensor readout with a frown. "Cutting teams making progress on the outer bulkhead." "Let them," Park said calmly. "Deck 9's shielding will hold for at least another 4 days, probably longer. By the time they get through, it won't matter anymore." "You're sure about that, Commander?" Park glanced at a small chronometer on the wall, counting down silently, connected to nothing the Vex could ever detect, tracking a schedule that only he and a handful of people back on Earth fully understood. "I trained for 3 years for a moment I hoped would never come," he said quietly. "But now that it's here, yes, Lieutenant, I'm sure. The Vex think they captured our best ship. What they actually did was walk 40 warships into a system, with only one door, and hand us the key to lock it." Outside, unseen by any Vex sensor, the chronometer kept counting down, and far across the system, at gate control stations that looked, to any casual observer, like ordinary traffic monitoring posts, human technicians, who had waited years for this moment, quietly began preparing the final sequence that would seal the 6th and last gate out of Aldrin's reach. One of those technicians was a woman named Ingrid Halverson, who had lived near the 4th gate of Aldrin's reach for almost 6 years, running a small repair shop that served the trading ships and independent haulers who passed through the system on their way to somewhere else. To every Vex patrol that had ever scanned her business, to every alien trader who had ever stopped for fuel or repairs, she was exactly what she appeared to be: a quiet, competent mechanic with a talent for fixing engines that other repair shops considered a lost cause. In truth, Ingrid had been selected for this posting at the age of 26, trained for 2 years in gate mechanics, far beyond what any ordinary repair shop would ever need, and sent to Aldrin's reach with a cover story so complete that even her own neighbors, aliens she had known for years, had no idea she was anything other than what she claimed to be. She had built real friendships in that time. She had repaired the ship of a Vex merchant named Asu 3 separate times, sharing meals with him afterward, listening to stories about his family back on a Vex colony world. She had done all of this while quietly monitoring gate traffic, cataloging patrol schedules, and waiting for a message she had begun to wonder, after 6 years, might never actually come. When the message finally arrived, it came through a channel, disguised as a routine parts order, from a supplier 3 systems away. A string of numbers that meant nothing to anyone, except Ingrid and the handful of others like her, scattered across Aldrin's reach. She read it twice, feeling her hands go slightly cold despite the warmth of her small shop, and then set to work exactly as she had trained to do so many times in simulation. The 4th gate's control station sat a short walk from her shop, staffed officially by a rotating crew of independent contractors who managed traffic scheduling for a modest fee paid by whichever empire currently claimed influence over the system. Ingrid had worked her way into a position on that rotation 2 years earlier, patient and unremarkable, exactly the kind of employee nobody thought twice about. On the day the message arrived, she took her normal shift, greeted her coworkers with her normal quiet friendliness, and waited until the station was down to a skeleton crew during the system's quiet hours, before finding a reason to be alone at the primary control terminal. What she did next took less than 4 minutes. A sequence of commands, memorized so thoroughly she could have entered them in her sleep, reached past the terminal's ordinary functions, into a hidden layer of access that had been built into the gate's control systems years earlier by an engineering team that had visited the station, disguised as inspectors from a trade authority nobody had ever bothered to verify too closely. The gate's control crystal, ancient and precious, was carefully removed and replaced with a dead copy that would satisfy any sensor scan while doing absolutely nothing at all. By the time her shift ended, Ingrid Halverson had helped seal one of the 6 ways out of Aldrin's reach and walked home to her small apartment above her shop exactly as she did every other evening, nodding politely to a Vex patrol officer she passed on the way, who had no idea he had just walked past someone who had spent the last hour making sure his entire fleet would never leave this system again. She was not alone in this work. 4 other operatives, each with their own cover story built over years of patient living, performed nearly identical tasks at 4 other gates around the system that same week, each one carrying the same quiet weight of knowing that the moment was finally here, after years of waiting for a war that might never have come at all. Back aboard her command vessel, Admiral Voss received confirmation of each gate's status one at a time over the following 2 days. A slow, careful process designed to avoid drawing any attention from Vex patrols who monitored gate traffic as a matter of routine. Each confirmation brought the plan one step closer to completion, and each one also brought a fresh wave of quiet relief to a command staff that had spent years training for a moment none of them had ever been entirely certain would arrive. Fourth gate confirmed sealed, reported Voss's communications officer, a steady young man named Tomas Reyes, who was no relation to the general of the same last name. Halverson's team reports no complications. Vex patrol activity in the area remains unchanged, no indication of suspicion. Good, Voss said, marking the fourth gate on her display with the same quiet status change the previous 3 had received. That leaves the 5th, on schedule for tomorrow, and the 6th, which we hold until the Vex commit to moving the Hammerfall. General Reyes, still studying the display from his seat nearby, allowed himself a rare moment of something close to admiration. 11 years building the ship, 6 years staffing operatives in a system most of the galaxy has never heard of. Admiral, I have been in this service for 30 years, and I have never seen a plan built with this much patience. That patience is the entire point, General, Voss said. The Vex Concord has spent 40 years watching young species make the same mistake, over and over. They rush. They panic. They try to prove their strength before they're ready, and it gets them conquered. We built this plan around doing the opposite of everything they expected from us, which means, for as long as this operation continues, our greatest weapon is not the Hammerfall's guns. It's our willingness to wait for exactly the right moment, and not 1 second before it. Reyes nodded slowly, looking back at the map, at the small orange star of Aldrin's Reach sitting quietly at the center of everything, unaware that it had become the most important system in human history, for reasons its own Vex garrison had no way of understanding yet. The 5th gate closed exactly on schedule, and nobody in the Vex fleet noticed at all. It happened quietly, the way Admiral Voss had planned it. A human technician, working at what the Vex believed was a small independent trading post near the 5th gate, simply flipped a series of switches that had been installed years earlier, disguised as ordinary maintenance equipment. The gate's control crystal, the ancient piece of alien technology that let ships pass through instantly, was removed from its housing and replaced with a dead copy, indistinguishable to any sensor that did not know exactly what to look for. Any ship that tried to use that gate now would find it simply did not respond. No explosion, no alarm, just silence, as if the gate itself had quietly gone to sleep. By the time anyone in Kestral's fleet thought to check the 5th gate's status, 5 of the 6 ways out of Aldrin's Reach were gone. Only the 6th remained, the one the Vex fleet had originally used, and it still glowed on every sensor as open, active, and completely normal. Draal did not know any of this yet. He was standing on the bridge of the ash vein, watching Sethis complete her final survey report on the captured Hammerfall, 3 days ahead of the schedule he had set. "We are ready to move it, Commander," Sethis said. "All external weapon systems remain locked. All propulsion systems are under our control, and the sealed sections show no sign of activity in the last 18 hours. I recommend we proceed with the transfer through the gate at your convenience." Draal nodded, satisfied. "Prepare the tow formation. We move within the hour." It was, in that moment, exactly the news Earth had been waiting for. 3 light minutes away, aboard her command vessel, Admiral Voss received the report from a hidden listening post near Aldrin's Reach, relayed through a chain of quiet, unremarkable-looking relay drones that had been drifting through the system for years, disguised as space debris. The Vex fleet was preparing to move the Hammerfall through the 6th gate. It was time. "Send the order," Voss said. "Close the 6th gate. All of it." The order traveled through channels that had been built for exactly this moment, through operatives who had spent years living quiet lives near Aldrin's Reach, waiting for a single message. When it finally arrived, they moved fast. The 6th gate's control station, disguised as a small refueling depot that had serviced passing ships of a dozen species for over a decade, without ever drawing suspicion, executed its final sequence. The gate did not vanish. It did not explode. It simply, silently, stopped working, exactly like the 5 gates before it, its status still reading as active and open on every Vex display, because the humans running the operation had made absolutely sure it would. Kestrel gave the order to move the Hammerfall through it 40 minutes later, with no idea anything had changed at all. The tow formation approached the gate slowly. The massive shape of the Hammerfall held steady between two Vex cruisers, escorted by a dozen smaller warships. On the Ashvane's bridge, Draal watched the approach with the quiet satisfaction of a commander about to complete the greatest achievement of his career. "Gate status?" he asked. "Reading active and stable, Commander," said his helm officer. "Approach vector locked. Transit in 3 minutes." 3 minutes passed. The lead cruiser reached the gate first, and nothing happened. For a moment, nobody understood what they were seeing. The gate sat exactly where it always had, its ancient structure glowing with the same faint light it always carried, every sensor reading it as fully operational. But the cruiser did not pass through it. It simply slowed, stopped, and hung in space in front of a gate that refused to open. "Report," Draal said, his voice sharpening. "Commander, the lead ship is not transiting. Gate systems show fully active, but no connection is forming. It is as if the gate is refusing the ship." "Try again," Draal ordered. They tried again, and again. Over the next hour, every ship in the fleet attempted transit through the 6th gate, and every attempt failed the same way, the gate glowing with power and doing absolutely nothing. Sethis, called to the bridge to investigate, ran every diagnostic her team could think of, and found nothing wrong with the gate itself. It was, by every measurement her instruments could take, working perfectly. It simply would not let anything pass. "This is not a malfunction," she finally admitted to Draal, her voice careful. "Gate malfunctions are gradual. They flicker, they degrade, they show warning signs before failing completely. This gate went from functioning normally to refusing every single ship instantly, with no warning at all. Commander, I do not believe this gate failed. I believe someone made it stop working." Draal's expression darkened. "Someone? You mean the humans?" "I do not know who else it could be," Sethis said. "And Commander, there is something else you should know. I attempted to check the status of the other 5 gates in this system, out of caution. All 5 report the same failure. Active status, full power readings, and complete refusal to transit any vessel." The bridge went very quiet. Kestrel had commanded fleets for 300 years. He had fought in border skirmishes, put down rebellions on newly conquered worlds, and led raids against a dozen young species who had never once suspected what was coming for them. In all that time, he had never once found himself in a system with every single exit sealed, surrounded by no visible enemy at all. "That is not possible," he said quietly. 6 gates, all of them, simultaneously. That is not the work of a species that could not even finish crewing its own flagship before we took it." "Commander," Sethis said carefully, "I would like to revise an earlier assessment. I told you the Hammerfall's sealed sections showed no activity, because our sensors detected no power draw and no confirmed presence. I believe that meant those sections were dormant, perhaps damaged, perhaps simply unfinished, exactly as the ship's overall condition suggested. I no longer believe that. I believe those sections were built specifically to hide activity from exactly the kind of sensors we used to search them." Draal turned to look at her fully now. "You are telling me the humans let us take this ship. I am telling you, Commander, that I do not know. But I believe we must now consider the possibility that everything we have observed since capturing the Hammerfall, the ease of the boarding, the fleeing support ships, the shipyard destroying itself rather than fight, may have been exactly what the humans wanted us to see." For the first time since the raid on Foundry 12, Kestrel felt something he had not felt in a very long time: doubt. He shook it off, the way a commander of his experience had trained himself to do for 3 centuries. Doubt was a luxury. He had 40 warships, thousands of soldiers, and the greatest prize any Vex fleet had ever taken. Whatever the humans had done to the gates, it was a temporary problem, an inconvenience, not a defeat. "Concentrate engineering resources on the gates," he ordered. "I want teams working around the clock to restore transit function. In the meantime, continue securing the Hammerfall. If there is something hidden aboard that ship, I want it found before the humans can use it against us." Word of the sealed gate spread through the Vex fleet within hours, and with it came a change in mood that no amount of Draal's confidence could fully hide. Soldiers who had been celebrating their commander's great victory just days before now found themselves looking nervously toward the edges of the system, toward gates that glowed with power and led nowhere, wondering exactly what kind of trap they had wandered into. Among the soldiers most troubled by this change was a young Vex Marine named Torek, barely into his second year of service, who had been part of the boarding party that first cut into the Hammerfall's outer hull back at Foundry 12. He had celebrated with the rest of his squad when Kesh declared the capture the greatest victory any of them would likely see in their careers. Now, 6 days later, standing watch aboard a cruiser hanging uselessly in front of a gate that refused to open no matter what the engineers tried, he found himself thinking less about glory and more about home, and whether he would ever see it again. "You've gone quiet," said his squad mate, an older Marine named Bessa, who had served with Draal for over a decade. "Thinking too hard is bad for morale, Torek. Keep it to yourself." "How can you not think about it?" Torek asked. 6 gates. All of them sealed, all at once. Nobody does that by accident. Somebody planned this. Planned it for us specifically. Bessa did not answer right away, watching the gate ahead of them glow uselessly in the dark. "I served in the war against the Corvi remnant, 30 years ago," she said finally. "We thought we had them beaten. Surrounded their last stronghold, cut off their supply lines. Victory should have taken a week. It took 4 months, because the Corvi had built defenses inside that stronghold nobody expected, hidden things, waiting for exactly the moment we thought we'd already won." She paused. "I am not saying the humans are the Corvi. I am saying I have seen this feeling before, this feeling that something is about to go wrong, and I have learned to trust it." Torek said nothing, but he found himself checking his weapon's charge a little more carefully after that conversation, and sleeping a little less soundly than he had during the celebration that followed the capture of the Hammerfall. Kesh, for his part, spent those same 6 days refusing to show the doubt that Sethis had voiced to him on the bridge, though it lingered at the edges of every decision he made. He ordered increased patrols around the Hammerfall's exterior. He ordered engineering teams to redouble their efforts at every sealed gate, rotating crews around the clock so that work never stopped. He sent a message back through channels toward the nearest Vex outpost, requesting additional ships be dispatched to Aldrin's Reach, though he knew, even as he sent it, that any relief force would need to somehow get through a gate system that no longer seemed to function for anyone. The message would never receive a reply. It could not, because there was no way out of the system for it to travel through, a fact that took Draal's communications officer 3 more days to fully confirm and report, each day adding another layer of quiet dread to a fleet that had arrived expecting an easy triumph, and instead found itself facing something it did not understand at all. Sethis, meanwhile, continued her survey of the Hammerfall with growing unease. She had spent her career studying young species for the Vex Concord's intelligence division before requesting a transfer to fleet engineering duty 5 years earlier, and something about the pattern she was seeing now nagged at her in a way she could not quite articulate to Draal, in terms he seemed willing to hear. "Commander," she said, catching him alone in a quiet corridor aboard the Ashvane 2 days before the fleet's scheduled attempt to move the Hammerfall through the 6th gate. "I want to raise a concern I do not believe I have stated clearly enough." "Go on," Draal said, though his tone suggested he had heard enough concerns from her already. "Every piece of evidence we have gathered about this ship and this capture fits a single pattern, if you allow yourself to consider it," Sethis said. "An unfinished dreadnought, found by accident, defended by nobody, abandoned by its own shipyard, a prize too perfect, too easy, arriving at exactly the moment our scout happened to be watching. Commander, in 40 years of studying young species, I have never once seen a capture this clean. Not from the Orin, not from the Threll. Not from any species we have ever taken something valuable from. Easy victories should make us more careful, not less, and I do not believe this fleet has been careful enough." Draal was quiet for a long moment, standing in the dim corridor, the weight of the words settling somewhere he did not want them to settle. "What would you have me do, Sethis? Abandon the prize? Leave it here and retreat before we've even confirmed there's anything to fear?" "I would have you consider," Sethis said carefully, "that we may already be past the point where retreat is a choice we still have." Neither of them had an answer for that, and the conversation ended there, unresolved. A quiet warning that Draal carried with him for the rest of that day and the days that followed. even as he continued preparing his fleet to move the Hammerfall through a gate that, unknown to either of them, had already been sealed for hours by the time they finally attempted the transit that would prove Sethis right in every way that mattered. Aboard the Hammerfall, deep in the hidden section that housed Commander Elias Park and the remaining 211 crew, the mood was very different. All 6 gates confirmed sealed, Lieutenant Chen reported, reading from a private channel that had just come through from Earth, relayed silently through the same hidden sensors that had watched the Vex boarding parties for days. Fleet Command is calling it complete. Aldrin's Reach is closed. A quiet ripple of relief moved through the small control room. The first good news any of them had received since the ship was taken. Park allowed himself a brief, tired smile, the first in almost a week. 40 Vex warships, he said, sitting in a system with nowhere to go, on top of a ship they think they control, with no idea that we are still here. He looked around at his crew, at faces that had spent a week hiding in the dark, waiting for exactly this moment. This is where the real work starts. The gates being closed doesn't win this fight. It just means the Vex can't run from it anymore. What's next, Commander? Chen asked. Park turned to a display showing the ship's internal schematic, the still-sealed sections glowing blue against the grayed-out areas the Vex controlled, and beyond it, a second display showing the wider system, 40 Vex ships scattered around 6 gates that would never open for them again. Next, Park said, we make sure they regret ever taking this ship in the first place. Outside the Hammerfall, across the darkened expanse of Aldrin's Reach, Vex engineering teams worked frantically at gate after gate, running diagnostic after diagnostic, finding nothing wrong and getting nothing to work. Kestrel stood on the bridge of the Ashvane, watching his fleet's status board, watching 40 ships that had arrived as conquerors, slowly beginning to understand that they might now be something else entirely. Prisoners. 6 days after the gates sealed, Kestrel called every senior officer in his fleet to a meeting aboard the Ashvane, something he had not done since the raid on Foundry 12. 40 ship commanders crowded into the flagship's largest briefing chamber, their voices low and tense, none of them quite managing to hide the worry that had been building since the gates first refused to open. Our engineers have found nothing, Draal told them, standing at the head of the room, forcing his voice to stay level. The gates are not damaged. They are not blocked. They simply do not function for our ships. We do not know how the humans did this, and we do not know how to undo it. Then we are trapped, said one of the younger commanders, a hot-tempered officer named Vashk, who commanded one of the fleet's escort cruisers. Trapped in a dead system, with no supply line, waiting for the humans to decide what to do with us. We are not helpless, Draal snapped. We have 40 warships. The humans have shown us nothing but sealed gates and an empty shipyard. If they intend to attack us here, they will need a fleet to do it, and we have seen no sign of one. Then what do you suggest we do, Commander? Vashk pressed. Sit here until our supplies run out? Draal did not have a good answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Aldrin's Reach had no farms, no fuel refineries the Vex controlled, nothing but rock and dust, and the 6 sealed gates that ringed the system like a cage. The fleet had left its home staging point with supplies for a standard patrol, not for an extended siege. Every day the gates stayed closed, brought that supply clock closer to 0. We take a different approach, Sethis said, speaking up from where she stood near the back of the room. Every eye turned to her. Commander, if the humans built this trap, they built it around one thing, the Hammerfall. Every part of this situation began with that ship. I believe it may also be the key to ending it. Explain, Draal said. We have spent 6 days trying to break into its sealed sections and failed, Sethis said, but we have also learned things about the ship in that time. Its core reactor is still active, still running, feeding power to systems we cannot access. That means someone, or something, is maintaining it. If there are humans still hiding aboard that ship, Commander, they may know exactly how the gates were sealed, and exactly how to reopen them. I recommend we stop trying to simply break in, and instead force them out. Draal considered this. It was, at least, a plan, and after 6 days of finding nothing but locked doors and dead ends, a plan was more than he currently had. How do you propose we force them out, Sethis? Cut their power, she said simply. The sealed sections draw from the ship's main reactor through conduits we do control. If we route that power elsewhere, starve those sections of energy, whoever is hiding inside will eventually have no choice but to open the doors themselves, or run out of air. It was a cold plan, and everyone in the room understood exactly what it meant for anyone still trapped inside those sealed compartments. Draal did not hesitate. Do it. Aboard the Hammerfall, in the small hidden control room that had become the center of the human resistance, Commander Elias Park watched the ship's internal power readouts with a frown, as several conduits leading into his section suddenly dropped in output. "They're cutting power to Deck 9 and Deck 11, Lieutenant Chen reported, watching her own display. "Looks like they've found the main feed lines and rerouted them." "Life support?" Park asked. "Backup reserves are holding for now, but if they cut the secondary feeds too, we're looking at maybe 72 hours before things get uncomfortable." Park had expected something like this eventually. 6 days of failed attempts to break in physically had been longer than he'd hoped for, but he had always known the Vex would eventually try something smarter than brute force. He pulled up a private channel to Earth, the same hidden relay that had carried updates back and forth all week. "Command, this is Park. Vex have begun cutting power to our sealed sections. Backup reserves give us approximately 72 hours before we start losing life support in the outer compartments. Requesting update on timeline for Phase 2. The response, when it came 4 minutes later, carried Admiral Voss's voice, calm as always. "Commander Park, Phase 2 authorization is confirmed. You are cleared to begin at your discretion. Fleet Command wants to remind you and your crew. Everything from this point forward is exactly what you trained for. We are not asking you to hold out any longer than necessary. We are asking you to finish this." Park closed the channel and turned to his assembled officers, all of them watching him with the particular stillness of people who had been waiting a long time for a green light. "Phase 2 is authorized," he said. "Sarah, wake up the rest of the crew. It's time they knew what this ship is really capable of." Over the next several hours, something began happening aboard the Hammerfall that no Vex sensor detected, because it was happening in the one place Vex sensors could not reach. Compartments that had sat quiet and dark for 6 days came alive, not with the obvious power signatures that would alert Vex monitoring teams, but with careful, deliberate movement. 211 crew members, engineers and soldiers, who had spent 3 years training in secret for exactly this mission, began preparing systems that had never once been tested outside of simulation. The Hammerfall had not been captured unfinished by accident. Every unfinished, incomplete, locked-out system the Vex had cataloged during their survey had been designed to look exactly that way, while actually being something else entirely. The main weapons batteries that Vex engineers believed were simply not yet installed were, in fact, fully installed, fully functional, and completely hidden behind false hull plating that read as solid metal to any scan that did not know precisely what to look for. The propulsion systems the Vex believed were capped at low output were capable of far more than anyone outside the ship's design team had ever suspected. "Weapons status?" Park asked, moving through the narrow corridor toward what his crew simply called the core, the heart of the ship's hidden systems. "All primary batteries report ready," answered Chief Engineer Diego Ramirez, a broad-shouldered man who had spent 11 years helping build the ship he now might have to fight from the inside of. "Reactors stable. We've got full power to everything that matters. The Vex think they cut our legs out from under us by starving Deck 9 and 11, but those decks were never where the real systems lived." "And the crew?" "Ready, Commander. Everybody knows their post. We've drilled this 100 times. This is just the first time it's real." Park nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. 211 people, hidden inside a ship surrounded by 40 enemy warships, about to attempt something that no simulation could fully prepare anyone for. "Then let's stop hiding," he said. The first sign Draal had that something had gone badly wrong came less than an hour later, when a Vex engineering team, working near what they believed was an empty, powered-down section of Deck 7, suddenly found themselves facing a bulkhead that was no longer solid hull, but a door, opening from the inside, with armed human soldiers on the other side. The fight that followed was short and one-sided. The Vex team, expecting no resistance from a section their sensors had told them was dead and empty, was overwhelmed in less than a minute. Alarms began sounding through the ship's captured sections almost immediately. "Commander." Sethas's voice came through on Draal's comm, sharp with alarm. "We have hostile human forces active on Deck 7. They came from inside a section our sensors reported as completely dormant. Seal that deck," Draal ordered, already moving toward the Ashvane's bridge. "Contain them." "Commander, that's not all," Sethas continued, her voice tightening further. "We are reading power surges throughout the ship, in sections we believed were disabled. Commander, I do not think we can contain this. I think the ship is coming online." On the bridge of the Ashvane, Draal watched in growing disbelief as the Hammerfall's status display, which had shown mostly gray, disabled systems for 6 days, began lighting up section by section. Weapons batteries, that had been catalogued as unfinished, suddenly reading as fully armed. Propulsion systems, that had been capped, suddenly showing power reserves, far beyond anything his engineers had estimated. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "We surveyed that ship for 6 days." "Commander," Yrel said from beside him, his voice grim, "I believe we surveyed exactly what they wanted us to find." Across the system, in the hidden control room that had coordinated the entire operation, Elias Park watched the same status display from the opposite side, watching decades of careful engineering and years of secret training finally come to life. "All weapons batteries report full power and ready to fire, Commander," Chief Ramirez called out. "Propulsion at full capacity. We have complete control of every core system aboard this ship." Park looked at the tactical display, at 40 Vex warships surrounding the Hammerfall, at 6 sealed gates ringing the edges of the system, at a fight that had been 11 years, and 3 years, and finally 72 hours in the making, finally arriving at its true beginning. "Then let's take our ship back," he said. "Full power to weapons. Target the nearest boarding vessels first. It's time the Vex Concord learned exactly what they really captured that day at Foundry 12. The Hammerfall's main batteries fired for the first time in the ship's existence, less than a minute later, and the battle for Aldrin's Reach truly began. In the hours leading up to that first volley, while Chief Ramirez and his engineering teams brought the ship's hidden systems online, a smaller and quieter fight had already been unfolding deck by deck through the Hammerfall's captured sections, one that would never make it into any official battle report, but that every soldier who lived through it would remember for the rest of their lives. Sergeant Priya Okonkwo Lindquist, one of Commander Park's most experienced soldiers, led a 12-person squad through a maintenance corridor that officially did not exist on any schematic the Vex had ever accessed, moving toward a junction where 3 Vex soldiers stood guard over what they believed was a simple storage compartment. She had trained for this exact kind of fighting for 2 years. Close quarters, narrow corridors, the strange dance of a boarding action, fought inside a ship both sides claimed as their own. "On my mark," she whispered into her squad channel, watching the 3 guards through a narrow gap in a false wall panel that had never once been detected by Vex sensors, despite 6 days of searching. 3, 2, 1. The fight lasted less than 20 seconds. Vex armor was strong, built for a species larger and tougher than humans on average, but it had never been designed to withstand weapons calibrated specifically to defeat it. Weapons that human engineers had spent years studying and countering, ever since the first captured Vex equipment had made its way into Federation research labs, following a minor border skirmish nearly a decade earlier. All 3 guards went down before any of them could raise an alarm, and Okonkwo Lindquist's squad moved on, deeper into territory the Vex believed was fully secured. This same scene repeated itself in a dozen locations across the ship almost simultaneously, coordinated down to the second by Commander Park and his staff, timed to strike the moment Chief Ramirez confirmed the weapon systems were ready to fire. It was not, Park had explained to his crew many times during their years of training, about winning every fight through superior numbers. The Vex boarding parties still aboard the Hammerfall outnumbered his hidden crew by nearly 3 to 1. It was about surprise, precision, and striking every critical point at once, before the Vex had any chance to organize a coordinated response. By the time the alarm finally did sound through the captured sections of the ship, alerting Kesh Draal to the fact that his boarding parties were under attack, 6 of the Hammerfall's most critical internal junctions had already fallen back into human hands, cutting off Vex reinforcements from reaching each other in any organized way. Confused, scattered radio reports flooded into the Ashvane's communication systems, contradictory and increasingly panicked. painting a picture that took Draal's staff nearly 10 full minutes to piece together into something resembling a clear understanding of what was actually happening aboard the ship they had believed was completely under their control. "Commander," Uriel reported, his voice tense as he relayed the growing chaos. "We are losing contact with boarding teams across nearly every deck. Those still reporting describe coordinated human attacks, striking from what they call impossible directions. Through walls and floors, our sensors confirm as solid." "Pull every boarding party back to the docked vessels," Draal ordered, already understanding, with a sinking certainty, that whatever chance his fleet had of holding the Hammerfall by force alone was slipping away with every passing minute. "If we cannot hold the interior, we withdraw and destroy it from range instead." That order came only moments before the ship's main batteries fired for the first time, turning what had already become a losing fight for control of the Hammerfall's corridors into an even more desperate battle for the survival of Draal's entire fleet. Aboard the ship itself, in the corridor where her squad had just cleared its 6th junction of the operation, Sergeant Okonkwo Lindquist paused for a moment to check on her people, finding all 12 still standing, exhausted but unharmed, the adrenaline of the fight still sharp in every face around her. "Report," she said into her squad channel, listening as each fire team confirmed their status one after another. "We're clear here, Sarge," came the reply from her second-in-command, a young corporal named Diallo. "Junction secure. What's next?" Okonkwo Lindquist checked the tactical update flowing in from Commander Park's central coordination feed, watching the map of the ship slowly turning from Vex Gray back toward human blue, section by section, exactly as 3 years of drilling had promised it would, if everything went according to plan. "Next," she said, "we hold what we've taken, and we let the Hammerfall do what she was built to do." Outside the ship, the first exchange of main battery fire lit up the darkness of Aldrin's Reach, bright enough to be visible from every gate in the system, a signal, though none of the Vex crews staring at it yet understood this, that the trap 11 years in the making had finally, completely, sprung shut around them. The Hammerfall's first volley tore through 3 Vex boarding vessels docked along its hull before any of them could even power up their engines to retreat. The weapons that Vex engineers had catalogued as unfinished, missing, or simply not yet built, turned out to be fully operational, and far more powerful than anything the Vex Concord had ever seen from a species this young. Fire erupted along the captured sections of the ship as human soldiers, who had spent 6 days hiding in the dark, poured out of hidden compartments, and began retaking corridor after corridor from the surprised Vex boarding parties still stationed aboard. Draal watched the disaster unfold from the bridge of the Ashvane, his confidence from days earlier now replaced with something closer to disbelief. "Pull our ships back from the Hammerfall's hull," he ordered. "All escort vessels, engage at range. I want that ship neutralized before it can do more damage." The order came too late for some. 2 more Vex cruisers, still holding position close to the captured Dreadnought, took direct hits from weapons batteries that unleashed more raw power than the Ashvane's own main guns. One cruiser's shields failed entirely under the assault, and its hull began venting atmosphere into space within seconds. The other pulled back, badly damaged, its captain screaming for support that would take crucial minutes to arrive. Aboard the Hammerfall, Commander Elias Park stood in what had once been the ship's secondary command center, now finally fully staffed and fully active, watching the tactical display with the focus of a man who had trained 3 years for exactly this moment. "Enemy cruisers pulling back to defensive range," Lieutenant Chen reported. "They're regrouping, Commander. Looks like they're trying to figure out what they're actually dealing with." "Let them figure it out," Park said. "Ramirez, status on the internal fighting?" "We've retaken decks 3 through 8, Chief Ramirez answered, his voice tight with effort, as he coordinated reports from a dozen different fighting positions across the ship. Vex boarding parties on those decks either surrendered or were forced back to their remaining docked vessels. "We're still working on the outer sections, but Commander, they didn't expect this, not even a little." Park allowed himself a brief, grim smile. "Good. Now let's make sure they never forget it. Bring the main batteries around. I want firing solutions on every Vex ship still within engagement range." Outside, the battle for Aldrin's Reach spread quickly beyond the Hammerfall itself. Draal, faced with a Dreadnought suddenly firing back with more power than his entire fleet combined, made the only decision he believed he had left. "All ships, concentrate fire on the human vessel," he ordered. We cannot let it operate freely. Bring everything we have to bear. 37 Vex warships turned their weapons toward the Hammerfall, and for a long, brutal stretch of time, the ship that had been built in secret for 11 years faced the full fury of an entire raiding fleet at once. Its shields, built from technology no Vex engineer had ever studied, held far longer than anyone aboard had truly dared to hope, but they were not infinite. Slowly, section by section, damage began to accumulate. Fires broke out in compartments that had stood empty and quiet for 6 days. Crew who had waited patiently through a week of hiding now fought to keep their ship alive, under a bombardment heavier than any simulation had prepared them for. Shields down to 60%, Ramirez reported, sweat visible on his forehead, despite the chill of the ship's damaged environmental systems. We're taking hits across multiple decks, Commander. We can't hold this position forever. Park studied the tactical display, watching 37 Vex ships arranged around his own, watching his shields tick steadily downward, and made a decision that had been part of the plan since the very beginning, a decision that had been waiting, patiently, for exactly this moment. Signal Earth, he said. Tell them we're ready for Phase 3. 4 light minutes away, Admiral Voss received the message aboard her command vessel and felt something in her chest loosen slightly, for the first time in over a week. Phase 3 confirmed, she said, turning to General Reyes. Give the order. What happened next was something Kestrel's fleet had no way to anticipate, because it had never happened in the history of human contact with any alien species. A reserve fleet of 42 Federation warships, built quietly over the same 11 years as the Hammerfall itself, distributed and hidden across a dozen unremarkable systems throughout human territory, had spent the last 6 days quietly gathering at a single 7th gate, one that did not appear on any Vex star chart, because it had been built and hidden entirely by human engineers working in secret, connecting directly to a dead-end pocket of space just outside Aldrin's reach. The gate had been finished only 4 months earlier. It had never been used. It had been built for exactly one purpose: to give humanity a way into Aldrin's reach that the Vex Concord would never see coming, because they did not even know it existed. The Federation fleet came through it in a single coordinated wave, 42 warships emerging into the chaos of the battle already underway, arriving directly behind the Vex fleet's rear formations. Multiple new contacts, Draal's sensor officer shouted, panic clear in his voice for the first time. Human warships, Commander, dozens of them, appearing from a location with no gate on any chart. Draal stared at the display in stunned silence for a long moment. 6 sealed gates, a ship that had turned out to be a weapon disguised as a trap. And now, somehow, an entire fleet arriving from nowhere at all. That is not possible, he said quietly, the same words he had said days earlier, when the gates first refused to open, and just as useless now as they had been then. The battle that followed lasted less than 2 hours. Caught between the Hammerfall's devastating firepower and a fresh fleet of 42 Federation warships attacking from an unexpected direction, the Vex raiding force that had once numbered 40 proud ships was systematically broken apart. Some ships fought to the last, destroyed in bursts of fire that lit up the dark system brighter than its own dim orange star. Others, seeing the battle was lost, attempted to flee toward the sealed gates, only to find them just as unresponsive as they had been for the past week. A handful, recognizing that surrender was the only option left, powered down their weapons and drifted, waiting for whatever fate the humans intended for them. Aboard the Ashvane, Draal watched his fleet collapse around him, ship after ship going dark on his tactical display, until finally, with barely a third of his original force still functional, and no way out of the system at all, he gave the order he had never once expected to give, in 300 years of service. Signal the human fleet, he said, his voice hollow. Tell them the Ashvane surrenders. The message reached Admiral Voss's command vessel within minutes. She read it twice, before allowing herself a long, quiet breath, the first real moment of relief she had felt since the day Foundry 12 burned behind a fleeing Vex raiding party. Accept the surrender, she said, and get me Commander Park. The connection to the Hammerfall opened a moment later, static crackling briefly, before Elias Park's tired but steady voice came through. Admiral. Good to hear your voice. Good to hear yours, Commander, Voss said, and for a moment neither of them said anything else. the weight of 11 years of secret construction, and a week of desperate hidden fighting settling quietly between them. Status report? Ships damaged but intact, Park said. We took hits across a dozen decks, lost 14 crew in the fighting, but the Hammerfall is ours again, Admiral. Fully ours. This time, in every sense of the word. And the Vex fleet? What's left of it is surrendering as we speak. Sethis, their lead engineer, she's the one who figured out we'd been hiding things from them the whole time. She's already asked to speak to whoever's in command on our side. Said something about wanting to understand what she called, and I'm quoting her exactly here, a species patient enough to let itself be captured. Voss allowed herself a small, tired smile. Tell her we'll be glad to explain, once we've had a chance to make repairs and get our people home. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at Aldrin's Reach spread first through the Sol Federation, and then, more slowly, through the wider galaxy that had spent 40 years believing humanity was simply another young, vulnerable species waiting to be discovered and conquered by someone older and stronger. The Vex Concord, having lost an entire raiding fleet and its most experienced commander to a species it had underestimated completely, sent no follow-up attack. Instead, within a month, a formal diplomatic message arrived at Earth, cautious and careful in a way no previous Vex communication had ever been. The Hammerfall itself, repaired, and finally, properly crewed, became something more than just a warship. It became a symbol, a reminder to every species that might one day consider testing humanity's defenses, that Earth had learned something important from 40 years of careful, quiet observation of the galaxy around it, that the best trap was not the one an enemy could see coming, but the one they walked into believing they had already won. Admiral Elena Voss stood on the newly rebuilt bridge of the Hammerfall 3 months later, watching Earth's blue curve rise beyond the viewport as the ship completed its first true patrol, fully crewed at last, fully hers. Beside her, Commander Elias Park studied the same view in comfortable silence for a while, before finally speaking. "You think they'll try again?" he asked. "The Vex, or someone else?" Voss considered the question for a long moment, thinking of Foundry 12, of 6 sealed gates, of 211 people who had waited quietly in the dark for a week, trusting a plan built 11 years before they ever needed it. "Someone will always try eventually," she said. "That's simply how the galaxy works. But whoever it is, whenever it happens, they'll be facing a species that has already shown it can be patient, careful, and absolutely ruthless when it needs to be, all at the same time." She looked over at Park, a small, steady smile crossing her face. "Let them come. We'll be ready. We always will be." Below them, Earth turned slowly in the dark, unaware of how close it had once come to disaster, and how completely, quietly, humanity had turned that disaster into its greatest victory instead. In the weeks between the battle's end and the Hammerfall's return to Earth orbit, there was a great deal of work still left to do, work that never made it into the official reports or the careful diplomatic messages exchanged with the Vex Concord, but that mattered just as much to the people who lived it. Sethis, the Vex engineer who had first suspected the truth about the Hammerfall's hidden sections, remained in human custody for nearly a month following the surrender, held not as a prisoner in chains but as a guest, under careful watch, in accommodations built quickly aboard a Federation support vessel to suit a Vex body's needs. She spent much of that time in long conversations with Commander Park and a rotating team of Federation scientists, trading information about Vex technology and history in exchange for the same about humanity, both sides aware that whatever came next between their two species would be shaped, in part, by what was learned during those quiet weeks. "I told Drowl something was wrong," she admitted to Park during one of their final conversations, sitting across a small table aboard the support vessel, a cup of something that approximated Vex tea steaming faintly between her clawed hands. He did not want to hear it. Victory makes people deaf to caution, even good commanders, even careful ones. "We counted on that," Park admitted. "Not on Drowl specifically. On the pattern. Every species has a version of it. We just made sure the trap was patient enough to wait for the moment when caution would matter least." Sethis studied him for a long moment. "Will you do this again? To the next species that underestimates you?" Park considered the question honestly before answering. "I hope we never have to. But if we do, I imagine we'll be patient again. It's the only advantage we really had going into this. Not bigger guns, not faster ships, just the willingness to wait 11 years for a single moment, and trust that the moment would come. Sergeant Okonkwo Lindquist and the rest of the hidden crew who had fought to retake the Hammerfall's corridors were quietly honored in a ceremony held aboard the ship itself, 3 days before it departed Aldrin's Reach for the long journey home. A ceremony attended by Admiral Voss in person, who made a point of shaking the hand of every single soldier who had spent that terrifying week hiding in the dark, waiting for a chance to fight back. "You did something today that nobody else in human history has ever done," Voss told them, standing in the ship's main hangar bay, surrounded by 211 exhausted but proud faces. "You proved a plan that existed only on paper and in simulation for 11 years, proved it under real fire, against real odds, and you brought your ship home. Earth will not forget what you did here, even if most of Earth never learns the details of exactly how you did it." 14 names were read aloud during that same ceremony, the crew members who had not survived the fighting, and the hangar bay fell silent for each one, a silence that Park would carry with him for the rest of his career, a reminder that even the most carefully built plan could not protect everyone from the cost of carrying it out. Kestrel himself, along with the surviving officers of his shattered fleet, was eventually transferred to a Federation holding facility to await the results of the diplomatic negotiations between Earth and the Vex Concord, negotiations that would take the better part of a year to fully resolve. He never spoke to Park or Voss directly again after his surrender, but Sethis relayed one final message from him before she was returned to Vex space as part of the eventual settlement. An acknowledgement, brief and formal, in the way Vex commanders were trained to deliver such things, that his fleet had been defeated, not through overwhelming force, but through patience, discipline, and a willingness to accept short-term loss in service of a longer plan. It was, Sethis explained, the closest thing to genuine respect a Vex commander of his rank was capable of expressing toward a defeated species, and the fact that he offered it to the ones who had defeated him instead said something the Vex Concord as a whole would spend years quietly reconsidering. Back on Earth, Daniel Farrow, now well into his 70s and long retired from active involvement in the project he had first proposed 4 decades earlier, watched the public parts of the story unfold from a small house overlooking the ocean, having finally been read into the full details of what his old philosophy had accomplished once it was finally tested for real. He sent a single message to Admiral Voss when the Hammerfall returned to Earth orbit at last, short enough to fit in a single line. Patience was never the absence of strength, only strength willing to wait for its moment. Voss kept that message for the rest of her career, a reminder, whenever the galaxy inevitably found new reasons to test humanity again, of exactly what had made the difference the first time it truly mattered.